So let's start out. It's a true pleasure to welcome you all today to this book launch, The Paradox of Proximity. We're going to hear much more about the contents of the book, the learnings this afternoon, but it's a true pleasure to me to launch this today at this event co-hosted by BLOXHUB and Cities for Better Health. My name is Torben Klitgaard, I'm the CEO in BLOXHUB, and I warmly welcome you, both you who turned up this afternoon in downtown Copenhagen in BLOXHUB, but also you joining us online. So good morning, good afternoon and good evening, and welcome to this event today. We're about 100 participants showing up both here physically, but also online. So thank you very much for that. We are truly, thoroughly delighted that so many great organizations and companies and individuals took time out this afternoon to share with us some great learnings on this work that we will dive into in the next couple of hours. This is a very, very important topic to us, to the cities, to the world, and we're going to hear much more about that in the few hours to come. The publication itself, the book, which I hope you in the room have had a copy of. If not, then please, in the interval or after this, after the event, please bring home a copy of the book with you. It's produced in collaboration with Cities for Better Health and Nikken Sekai, one of Japan's largest architectural studios, and our team here in BLOXHUB. But before we begin, allow me just to say a few words on what BLOXHUB is. We're an international community with 400 plus members both in Denmark, in the Nordics, in EU and globally. And with a vibrant clubhouse here in the center of Copenhagen, we bring together more than 1,000 residents on an everyday basis with our 135 companies that work here and have their office here in the co-working space in BLOXHUB. Our mission as a community is to co-create desirable urban futures. And that, of course, entails how we can create livability, how we can create long-term planning, how we can create more sustainable cities going forward. And especially also turning to this agenda, how we can make sure that even though we are moving more and more together in cities, we are not necessarily separated socially. That is a phenomenon that we have seen over the years. That is a phenomenon that is shown in this book. And the solutions for that is some of the things we're going to discuss later this afternoon. Bear in mind that in only 24 years from now, in 2050, roughly, academics fight a little bit about the statistics, but roughly 70 to 75% of the global population will live in urban areas, in cities and in suburban areas. And in EU alone, the figure is 84% living in cities alone in 2050. And that, of course, produces enormous challenges to the fact that we have to create livable cities in order to cater for this massive urbanization over time. This calls for new ways of planning, new ways of financing, new ways of involving the citizens, new ways of creating solutions for the public space, etc., etc. But that is all something that we're going to dive into later this afternoon. So allow me to turn to this afternoon's program as seen on the screen. In just a few seconds, my co-host of today, Joe Jewell, will present the Cities for Better Health and himself and take part in the program as such. We will be introduced a little later to the book and the sort of overall findings of the book by my very good colleague Ann-Britt Elvin Andersen, the Chief Communications Officer here in BLOXHUB, followed by Pete Bombasi, who is, and I have to turn to my notes here, sorry about that, Pete, the CEO and founder of Genwell, a Canadian NGO, and as such a contributor to the WHO report on loneliness last year, and Pete will be joining us online in a little while going forward in the program. Then following that, a great panel discussion sort of hosted by my good colleague Jacob Norman, the Director of Global Networks and Partnerships here in BLOXHUB, together with Mario Shapiro, Jack Renteria, Joe Jewell and Ann-Britt and Marcus Calmiri. So we really, really look forward to that in getting sort of a very diverse on the challenges, but also some of the solutions that we see out there. And last but not least, a tradition here in BLOXHUB, of course, we end up this afternoon's event by networking and 1 or 2 drinks as you please. And of course, the book in your pockets on your way home. Please to take a book with you when you leave. So from BLOXHUB, from me, a very, very warm welcome to this afternoon's event. Thanks for showing up both here in BLOXHUB and online. And then I'll pass the word to my co-host, Joe Jewell. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks very much, Torben. It's a great pleasure to be here, also on behalf of Novo Nordisk and the Cities for Better Health programme. We are residents of BLOXHUB, I think, formal residents. I mean, we're often here and we have a relationship. I'm not sure if that counts as residents, but we're part of the family and have been friends for a long time with the BLOXHUB family. And of course, our relationship and the work on the topic of mental health and loneliness really kicked off last year, and we found it a really, really motivating and meaningful partnership and initiative. So thanks to all the good colleagues who have been working on that with us. A little bit about Novo Nordisk and Cities for Better Health. So Novo Nordisk is a healthcare company based here in Denmark, working on defeating serious chronic diseases. We like to take a very holistic approach to the topic that we work on, and that includes a focus on prevention. So how do we actually show up as a healthcare company and contribute towards society with a meaningful impact on prevention? And one of our solutions, or one of the offers to working with society that we have, is our program called Cities for Better Health that we've been running now for more than 10 years. Cities for Better Health, we work across more than 50 cities around the world. Copenhagen is one of them. But in very different parts of the world, we work on the topic of preventing serious chronic diseases. And we take a focus on risk factors for chronic diseases like physical activity, diets, but also increasingly thinking about the interactions with mental health and thinking how the whole stacks up to something greater. We're very pleased that Marcus is here from the city of Turku in Finland and will be speaking on the panel. It's one of the cities that are in our network and an example of how we partner at the local level with city authorities, with civil society, with community organisations to make a difference on health. Cities for Better Health has our roots in research and thinking about how social and cultural factors actually contribute to better health and to shaping health behaviours. Increasingly, we're also moving from research into action and thinking about how we can translate the insights from that research into impactful action on the ground. So such an action-oriented research like we're going to be discussing today is really relevant for us about how do we take some steps and think about the solutions that integrate not only physical health but also mental health and well-being. So super happy to be part of this collaboration. And it also really aligns with the principles on which our network is run. So, working across physical activity, diet and social support for better physical and mental health, as I've already said, but also thinking about equity. So working with underserved communities, working about addressing the drivers of health, the social determinants of health, so that everybody has the opportunity for better health as part of everyday life. And that, of course, involves co-creating solutions with the community, involving the voice of community about what they need, but also not targeting the solutions only at the individual level, but thinking about families, communities, and the built environment. So the intersection with the architecture, the urban planning community is also super important here. So we agree cities are important. We agree that it's about place and neighbourhoods approach. So I'm really glad to be having these conversations across sectors as well. So not only the health sector, but also those people who are working on different angles at the city level. I think that the topic of loneliness and mental health and well-being is super important. It is a new area for us as Cities for Better Health, but as I mentioned before, it's always been at the root of what we're doing. But it's something that affects many people around the world. So 1 in 6 people worldwide are experiencing a sense of loneliness. And that is something we see in many different countries. Perhaps it's different levels in the country where you're coming from, but it's not an insignificant amount of people who are experiencing this sense of loneliness as part of everyday life. It tends to be concentrated in underserved communities, people who are not in employment, people who have a low income. It's affecting different groups differently, and I think we need to think about how that plays out in different contexts. But it's also associated with other drivers of ill health or consequences of ill health. So we know that loneliness is associated with conditions like obesity, that people who are experiencing loneliness perhaps are not getting the physical activity that they require to be healthy. So how do we think about solutions that address the multiple drivers of health, but also create the opportunity for the best health? So I think that is hopefully what will come out in the conversation as well, about like what are the concrete solutions to this challenge that we've identified, or speaking about as part of the book, and what are the concrete steps that we could take? How do we reinforce community groups? How do we emphasize or lift up these community groups, because they play such an important role in creating a sense of belonging? How do we strengthen the social infrastructure in cities to make sure that people have places to gather, places to come together, such as parks, cafes, libraries? And how do we build and design cities so that the neighbourhood approach is actually one that is designed for people and for health and well-being? Hopefully, with Marcus's contribution, you'll hear about the work that we are doing together with the city of Turku in around sports vouchers and how that can encourage participation and a sense of belonging. We're also doing work on this topic in places like Houston, where we actually take a faith-based approach. So using faith groups where people gather as an opportunity to bring them together, connect the mind and body for health and well-being, but also disease management. And also locally here in Copenhagen, we've been working in Tingbjerg for many years, thinking about which are the different settings in an urban community that can be used and leveraged for health. So, taking health out of the primary care setting, out of the doctor's surgery, into the community, where, for example, community kitchens or community gardens, where people can come together in an inclusive way to create health. And then also down Sporty, those of you who are not from Copenhagen, an old train yard that is now being converted into a new community. How can we build from the outset a community centre, a community place of gathering, where the barriers to participation in society are lowered to the greatest possible level, whether that's in health and physical activity or social gatherings? So, sorry to take up a few minutes of your time just to say who we are as Cities for Better Health and why we are participating in this project, but it's been a really meaningful journey for us, and we're super excited about the insights. And this book has been on a little bit of a world tour, and it's been getting great reception around the world. So I want to congratulate the team also for bringing attention to the issue, and thank my colleague Thomas, who's been involved. Thank everybody who's been involved, and now hand over to Ambrit, who will be presenting more of the detail of the book. But thanks for gathering today to hear about the insights. Looking forward to the conversation. Thank you.
Welcome to everybody. I'm gonna start you off with a story. When I started out interviewing people for this book, it didn't start out as a book. It started out as a very small publication. We didn't think we've had enough momentum or anything to dive into this topic. But then very, very quickly, when we started speaking to people, we found that there was a lot of momentum, both when we went east and when we went west, and also when we went out into our local communities. So one thing I did when I did an interview in Korea, in Seoul, I interviewed the director of the Center for Social Isolation, and I asked her, what is one of the most memorable stories that you've heard in your many years in dealing with this topic in a big city? And she said they had a crisis hotline where people who were in suicidal or in very deep depression could call in. And one day they received a call from a young man in his 20s just to tell somebody that he got a new job. And she said that one really hit, because that guy does not need therapy. He needs a friend. He needs a colleague. He needs a neighbor. He just needs somebody to share a bit of good news. It's very symptomatic, we think, when we see the statistics as well, because if you look at loneliness today, the WHO has declared it a global epidemic just before the summer last year. It's rising across the world. And one of some of the demographic that is really rising is, of course, the older demographics, but it's also the younger generation. And he was very symptomatic of that. He was alive, he had a job, he was educated and everything, but he still had that sense of that I don't really belong in this city. And as Joe also mentioned, we do see right now, the WHO said that 16% of people experience loneliness globally. And of course, it is defined more or less as the painful gap between desired and actual connection. But again, I don't think loneliness is not something we should be afraid of. In essence, it is a feeling, just like hunger is a feeling, just like thirst is a feeling. It's something that should not be treated as a failing, but as a social signal. But it's also become a problem when we look systematically, because it's rising and it's becoming more chronic, and it leads to social isolation. It can lead to even worse cases that can lead into mental depressions, anxiety, and worst case suicidal tendencies. But it is, of course, a paradox when we ventured into defining this book, is that we have cities and more people who are so closely connected and closely centered, but they don't have that sense of connection. They're very, very close together, but we don't feel connected to each other. So the proximity paradox is something that we've sort of dived into in this book. And what we see is, of course, cities can be both a cause and they can be a cure. Because we have seen, when we did these interviews, we did have a tendency, or we did hear that people were talking about, we've had all these extremely efficient cities today, that maybe they've become too efficient. Maybe we need to stop, maybe we need to do something else and look at, maybe we need more disruption or more serendipity. So we do have the cause that can be cities, but we also have the solution, which of course is the cure. So because we can do something about it. And that is also why we think, from our perspective, that the built environment have possibilities to chip into these solutions as well. This is not just a social health problem, it can also be an urban design problem as well. What we often see when we've sort of tried to find domains of how to do this is that we all know the proximity. We have physical proximity, which we all know. Those are very tangible very often. There we have the density of a city. We have the housing. We have mobility. Then, of course, we have the functional proximity as well, which is we have access and we have design and we have movement that has gone extremely efficient today. Then we have social proximity, where we have had programming that we have had for decades. We've had community build-up. We talk about a lot about social health. What we'd like to dive into when we talk specifically about loneliness, which is a bit of a more of a niche, is, of course, we would like to talk about the emotional proximity as well, which is a bit different because it's very subjective. When I feel lonely, it's different from when you feel lonely. Is that at all possible to design for individual feelings? If I walk down a street, we can experience that kind of a street in very, very different ways. So we would like to dive into this one as well when we do this project of feeling seen, of feeling safe, and how do we have that subjective feeling in mind as well. When we did all these interviews, we went, as I said, we went east, we went west, and we went, of course, in our own backyard as well. We did find growing loneliness, but we had contradictory reports of why this loneliness epidemic would arise. I would interview people in, for instance, Japan or in Korea, they would very often tell me, well, it's because we have these Confucian principles where we have this collectivism, where people are dependent on each other and we decide everything together, and you sort of stand out of the group if you don't sort of meddle in. So it can be, they sometimes compare it to like a mirror ball, where you had like mirrors in all kinds of directions. So they would just basically tell me, it's hard work being out and about and being in communities, because you have to adapt all the time. You're not completely yourself. If we went the other way, when we went to North America, they would also see a big increase in loneliness, but they would give more of a contradictory answer. They would maybe say, you are the architect of your own fortune. It's very individual. We will learn not to depend on other people. You should be able to take care of yourself. So even though we have these contradictory statements, we still have a paradox. We still have a grow in loneliness. So it also indicates maybe that there are other factors at stake here. Maybe there are common denominators that we need to look at. And one of those is, of course, that we maybe see social structures being more fragmented. Some family structures are being fragmented. We lose some of the natural third places that has been going on in at least the global north. They have been commercialized very often. We see people going to Starbucks more than maybe being just in public spaces. So there's been a lot of theories about that. We also see that, of course, the whole digital layer is a big part of it. We have new studies coming out of MIT that says we move 50% faster in streets, at least in North America. They've done some studies, and you have 14% less lingering in public spaces that you did 30 years ago. So there is some kind of efficiency thing that we might have to address. We tried to, when we did the book, do these 5 lenses on interfaces, because we see, of course, loneliness is not a single problem. It's something that is deeply inseeped in how we design cities, how we design our neighbourhoods, and how we live and how our home is defined. So we have, of course, everyday encounters. We have housing and belonging, movement and health, community networks, and futures thinkings. But of course, there is hope as well, we found when we did this book. Because we found that loneliness, at least some believe, is predictable, which also means it's preventable. For instance, we went to Seoul to meet Sujin and Daniel. Sujin is the one I talked to you about just before. She is the director of the Seoul Institute for Socialist Isolation, and she represents the Seoul Welfare Foundation, who has been given a lot of money by the city government of Seoul to prevent this very, very specific topic. They see an increase. They have 40% single-person households in Seoul. They have 62% reported problems with loneliness. They have a huge suicidal rate. So they have, from a government level, chosen to really put money behind this. And what they do out there is they have these data-driven system where they have 47 data points from energy usage, from water waste to patterns in how you behave digitally. If you use an app to buy all your groceries, if they can sort of see if we have somebody who is at risk to becoming isolated. I mean, so they have this prevention team set up where they use a lot of data to do this. One of the other things that we found a lot when we talked about how to activate this one is that nobody wants to join the Lonely Club. It's an extremely stigmatizing topic. I don't want to. We've done this before. We asked people, "Do you feel lonely?" and nobody answers. But as we also know, that WHO says 1 in 6 people have a problem with loneliness. So it's stigmatizing. And what we found is, especially this guy here, Professor Sakakura from the City University of Tokyo, who have done a whole living lab in Setagaya, which is one of the most populous wards in Tokyo. He has done what he's called Happy Street, and there's a big sign of Happy Street about, and it's pedestrianized, which is very rare when you go to Japan. And he make these very, very deliberate pop-ups when you walk down the street, where you're supposed to be extremely surprised. Expect the unordinary. It's completely serendipitous. It's not planned. So it's everything that you just go to just show that I want your attention. I want you to sense the city. I don't want you to be plugged in another digital layer because you have headphones on. So he does a lot of things to say we need to disrupt the efficiency that we see in cities today. We've been talking about programs for a number of years. It's nothing new. It's how do we activate people. It's important. It's an essential layer. But what we've seen when we interview people as well is sometimes when we program for loneliness, it's maybe sometimes a little bit different, because if we design for something that is extremely high activating at the beginning, you actually exclude people. Because loneliness, if you've had that feeling, loneliness changes behavior. You feel more socially excluded, so you're not as inclined to chip in, to go into an activity if you already have loneliness. So you need to start at a lower threshold as well. So just in the very beginning, people would need to feel just the permission to stay and feel comfortable to be in a place, not necessarily be extremely interactive or participate, just the whole calmness of just being present is very often, if you have very severe loneliness, people will start to come. And then you have that psychological logic of saying, then you can feel a sense of belonging, you feel safe, you build familiarity, and then you can see psychologically that people will start to contribute, and they will go from being an observer to becoming more of a participant. Another thing that we found is, of course, when we see the structure of loneliness, it's very easy to talk about psychology or good intentions, but we need to sort of have the mechanisms to do something as well. And of course, if we see this not just as a social health problem, but also as an urban planning problem, we can come together to do something about it. And one of the very, very interesting things as well is, of course, a lot of people probably from the urban environment know this guy, Carlos Marino, who has formulated the idea of the 15-minute city at least, and has had some ideas about proximity a lot. He also has some thoughts about, we have this new AI, what do we do with it? We have AI all over the place. It changes how we behave. Now we can work from home. We can go to a cafe to work. We have co-working spaces, so we don't need to go far. How does that change how we belong to a place? So maybe we don't need to throw out and see all tech as hostile, but we can also look at not just artificial intelligence, but also ancestral intelligence. We should have a balance of having some key denominators, having some cultures, having some rituals, having something that make us still feel that sense of belonging to a place, whether it's a home, whether it's a neighborhood, or whether it's a whole city. And we had some talks that were very interesting, for instance, in Tokyo, where the lifespan of a building sometimes is 30 years. What happens is, do we take some cultural elements, do we take some kind of clues out that makes us not feel as belong if the cityscape changes that often? But, so very, very quick introduction, of course. The whole thing is, how do we help? The wrong question is, how do we help lonely people reconnect? Maybe we should more ask, how do we create environments where connection naturally occurs? In the book, which you are all free to have a copy of for free, it's down there at least. It's also online if you want a digital version. We've added 10 principles based on all the interviews that we've done. So you're here to lean into those, and of course you have a digital code if you want an online version as well. But now I'll stop my speed talking, and I'll introduce our next guest, which is Pete Bombaci, who I interviewed. He is placed in Toronto, having the Genwell Foundation, and I'll go live to you. Hi, Pete.
Britt, how you doing?
I'll hand over the crowd to you.
Thank you, Ann Britt. Honestly, an absolute pleasure. I'm grateful for the opportunity to be here. great introduction and a great segue into to what we'll talk about for about the next 15 minutes. I don't have a ton of time, but I'm going to try to run through some information that I think is complementary in nature to maybe some of the information that the people in this room are familiar with when we think about infrastructure, when we think about programming. What we do at GenWell is slightly different. So I want to share a 10-year journey that I've been on to educate, empower, and catalyze Canadians around the importance of face-to-face social connection as a proactive step that we can all take for our health, our happiness, our longevity, and for the betterment of society. Let me pull up my slides here. Hopefully this is easy to do because we tested it earlier. And now I can't see anybody. Is it say that I'm sharing? Sorry, everyone. No, that does not say. I need to go to window. There it is there. Share. Here it comes. So I'm grateful for the opportunity to be here because what I want to share with you today is really a 10-year journey that I've been on to launch Canada's Human Connection movement and really help people educate, empower, and catalyze around the importance of human connection. And today I want to just share some of the insights because I think although everybody in this room is already bought in, there's no sales pitch here today. I think what we need to understand is maybe we haven't informed people of the why behind what we are trying to do in building more connected communities. I'm hoping that today is really just a start of the conversation about why we need people to understand how important social connection is, whether that's you doing it in your own life, whether it's you working with your teams or in the communities that you serve. There's a lot of information here, but the first thing I'd love to do is get Mark to pull up a video that I'd love Mark to show in the room. So Mark, if you would be kind enough to pull up that video and share. This is a public service announcement that we launched last year in Canada to help people start to recognize how important social connection and social health is for their well-being.
The more we get together, together, 'cause your friends are my friends are your friends. The more we get together, the happier we'll be.
Thank you, Mark. Appreciate that. So I think the premise of which GenWell, Canada's Human Connection movement, was built on was that for the last 50 years, we've educated people on exercise, eating well, sleep, water, don't drink too much, and don't smoke. Unfortunately, we didn't educate people about the importance of their social connections and social health because I think we intuitively thought people figured it out, and that we thought that proximity, as is referenced in the book, was the solution, that people would come together and that would solve for connection. But I think what we're recognizing is that although we can build the spaces, although we can encourage people to come together, that maybe we need to actually empower them with the knowledge as to why they should talk to the person when they're in a community, when they're on a park bench, when they're in any space that has been curated to bring people together. Because at the end of the day, if we don't understand why, if you're a Simon Sinek fan, maybe sometimes we don't take advantage of it because we don't recognize how important it is for our health and well-being. So the research in Canada tells us that 52% of people feel lonely on a weekly basis. And so when I started this movement, somebody said to me, it's a seniors movement. And then in the pandemic, it was about young people, but it's also new moms, it's new Canadians or immigrants, it's people who are transitioning around the world. The reality is we can no longer take a reactive response to this, as everybody in this room knows, but we need people to proactively understand why it's so important. There's three real messages that I want everybody to take away from this presentation, which is none of us have ever been formally educated on the importance of this, whether you're an individual, a business, and the benefit that come to us as a society. We have to recognize that since the pandemic, we've all still been under a lot of stress and turmoil, and obviously it continues. And so the need for us to get people to take action on their social connections and social health has never been more important. And finally, it's once we understand how important it is, we start to realize that it is a foundational element of everything in society, including our health and well-being. Just to give you a quick snapshot of me, I spent 20 years in alcohol. I was a marketing and sales guy. And in that time, I recognized that happy hour wasn't about cheap drinks, but it was about being with people. Because if there was a lineup at a bar that was, if there was nobody in the bar that was selling cheap drinks, we'd go and line up with our friends because we wanted to be with friends. I then led Movember Canada, the mustache charity. And our focus in Canada was really about bringing community together. And we ended up being the #1 fundraising country in the world for 5 years. I've led this movement for 10 years, and I'm a husband, a hockey lover, a father, and an eternal optimist, believing that if we can change the world and build healthy connections, we truly can have have an impact on everyone. So I don't think this is a surprise to anyone. We live in the most disconnected society in history, even though we feel at times that we're more connected than ever before. And the reality is we face more barriers than ever before to building those connections. And part of the reason I think we don't build those connections is because we don't understand just how important it is. Because once we do understand how important it is and we connect it to all the downstream crisis that we try to prevent with the healthcare system and a social support network, we start to recognize that social connection is a part of solving for almost all the challenges that we are facing in our society. And we'll talk about those in a minute. So here's just some of the negative consequences that come when we feel chronically or persistently lonely. When I started this movement, everybody told me it was mental health was the struggle, and that's what we were trying to solve for. But when we understand that it also impacts our physical health, when we recognize that it costs the system more because we spend more time in hospitals, we start to realize that there's a huge impact on so many aspects of our lives. If you have children, this is research that shows up to the age of 25. This is what's happening to our young people today when they don't have that sense of connection in their lives. We're setting them up for a lifetime of health issues, academic challenges, even career challenges. And so, what we need to recognize is that we need to build the connections now. And the solution isn't just burdening the people that are struggling with loneliness with the solution. It's not about you buck up and be more social. It's about all of us recognizing that as a society, at a societal level, if we all did a little bit more, talking to strangers, saying hello to our neighbor, connecting with our colleagues, different people in our lives, that would actually address the growing issue of social isolation, disconnection, and loneliness that we're facing. One of the issues that I'm not sure everybody quite recognizes is that when we see extremism, when we see racism, violence, anger, aggression, a lot of this can be tied back to the continuing disconnection, chronic or persistent, because oftentimes we can get inside our own heads and we start to think that people don't like us or we don't like people for what we perceive to be a personality or a position on a particular subject, political polarization. And so we lash out at people. So when we think about social connection and educating people about this information, we start to see this through a different lens. This is work by Dr. Julianne Holt-Lundstad of the US. I'm sure when we think about the issues that we have told society to concern themselves with, obesity, physical inactivity, air pollution, alcoholism, but when we look at actually what is the greatest impact on our early mortality, we start to recognize that it's actually a lack of social connection. But do people actually understand that in society? And I don't think they do. I was told my whole life that if I ran a 5K every day, I would solve all my problems. But I think we're awakening that it's much more than just physical activity. So let's look at the positives. I never like to leave a room on a downer, so we always like to focus on the solution because we're not a loneliness campaign, we're a human connection movement, focusing people on where we want to go versus what the problem is. So we know it's the single greatest contributor to happiness in our lives. That's the 85-year study out of Harvard. We know it reduces anxiety and depression, which are the two leading mental health diagnoses since the end of the global pandemic. It increases empathy and compassion in a world where we're oftentimes trying to build bridges between communities or dealing downstream with the crisis of DE and I when people don't feel seen, valued, and heard. Oftentimes the solution is building these connections proactively so that we can understand each other and build that empathy and compassion. It builds resilience, strengthens our immune system, increases our self-confidence, reduces prejudice and discrimination, and increases your chances of living longer by up to 50%. That's out of the Stanford longevity study. So those are the individual, and it's the single greatest preventative action to avoid depression. That came out of Massachusetts General Hospital at the end of the global pandemic. So we can see that it has many benefits to building those healthy connections in our lives. But oftentimes, the conversation is around what about these? So the relationship with homelessness, food insecurity, and addiction bi-directional. If we have healthy connections in our lives, we're less likely to find ourselves in those situations. And the introduction of a loving, caring human being into those situations can help us overcome those challenging situations as well. But what other community things that we can improve our communities by making them stronger and safer? It increases civic engagement. It strengthens trust, something that's lacking, across society right now. It can insist in emergency preparedness. It reduces incivility. So when we think of what the outcome of political polarization is, when we isolate ourselves, we can again build up those walls and barriers that make us feel that we have less in common than we actually do with people. It's a defense against mis and disinformation, and one of the most powerful protective factors against suicide. There's one study that says for a young person, I think it's 15 to 24, that the increased risk of suicide goes up by 17 times when we feel chronically or persistently disconnected. So in 2016, right here in Canada, I launched Canada's Human Connection Movement. Our mission is to make the world a happier and healthier place by educating, empowering, and catalyzing Canadians around the importance of face-to-face social connection as a proactive step that we can all take for our health, our happiness, our longevity, and for the betterment of society. There's two things that we're not. Anne Britt just touched on it. We're not anti-technology because technology is here to stay. But what we do want to do is ensure that people understand what aspects of technology take time away from building healthy connections and what aspects of technology can help us, build or rebuild those connections. As well as, we're not a mental health campaign. We are a social health movement. We want to swim upstream. We want to get out of the crisis, and we want to help inform people, educate, empower, and catalyze around human connection before they get to the crisis. So when we say we educate, we empower, and we catalyze, it's all rooted in behavior change. It's understanding that just learning, but without having tools or without occasions, that won't solve the problem. Just having occasions and infrastructure without knowing why, that won't solve the problem either. So it's really a holistic approach built on our social health framework that will help us achieve a long-term behavior change of society. So we do social health workshops in work classrooms, communities, seniors, and now we work in a lot of municipalities, helping the leaders of municipalities understand that when they think about infrastructure as one piece, that they need to complement it with the understanding of why and what are the impacts, both as an individual and as a society. We have many tools, from social media to a knowledge hub to a volunteer program, and also a lot of swag. We love our swag because these things become the catalyst to starting up a conversation. And we will be launching momentarily our moments of connection cards, which will be available to every Canadian if they'd like to actually have a card to acknowledge moments of connection, because those tangible acknowledgements help people recognize that those little interactions that they have can make a difference in people's lives. We also run 6 campaigns every year. Each of these campaigns targets a different segment of the population, a different time of the year when people can struggle to build or rebuild connection, or key opportunities, whether it's talking to strangers or being conscious about our digital usage, that help people recognize that the opportunity to connect is all around us if we lean into it. Our face-to-face February is focused on young people. Seniors Loneliness Awareness Week obviously focused on seniors. And Genwell weekends are at times of the year when people can struggle during seasonal transition. We want to help people build connection when they need it most, when it helps them set themselves up for the next season, whether that's coming into the summer and out of the darker, cold days of winter, or coming off the summer and setting up for a darker, colder fall and winter season. We've also been a key component to developing the first ever set of social connection guidelines that were launched in December of 2025. You can find those at socialconnectionguidelines.com. This is similar to eating and exercise guidelines, and I think it is the starting point of governments, obviously the World Health Organization, leaning into social health and how they are part of the solution in educating people about how important it is. So really what we're talking about today and the work that we do is around social health, which is the upstream positive and proactive way of improving mental, physical, and societal well-being, because the solution to this problem cannot just be trying to treat people after they're sick or in crisis. We have to find a way to swim upstream and solve for this before we get to those crises. I'm going to skip over a few slides because I only have a few minutes left. So I'm going to just say that some of the insights that we share, we do workshops around the world and sharing the information, which is most of the people, 50% of the people we met before the global pandemic were not people we intended to see. So when we stay at home in our basements, wherever we might work, like I'm doing today, we need to be conscious that we need to get out to let those casual collisions happen. A face-to-face interaction has 9 times the brain activity as a digital one. So oftentimes we're working remotely, we're not getting those opportunities to have face-to-face interactions. We need society to understand that this impact will have a negative impact over time. I'm going to flip obviously to AI, a big issue as we move forward with job displacement. What will people do when they don't have 8 to 10 hours a day to toil away? We need to start helping people build these healthy connections so that they can be more resilient through the challenging times that I think are ahead. So some quick insights. Those who talk to strangers, research in Canada shows those who do it once a week are up to 3 times happier than those who don't talk to strangers. Unfortunately, we've told people for 50 years not to do it, but one of our big campaigns is our Talk to a Stranger campaign. Those who know their neighbors are up to 3 times less lonely. Of course, family and friends add value to our happiness and to our reduced loneliness. But we also need to understand that our colleagues, by research, suggest that our relationships with our colleagues, the combined benefit of reduced loneliness and increased happiness, can be greater than our own family and friends. And I think that's a really big takeaway, because we all are struggling with whether it's return to office or what happens with AI, but our colleagues can play a really important part of making us feel seen, valued, and heard, can introduce us to other people, networks, fun, engagement, so many things that our colleagues can do when we toil away 8 to 10 hours a day. So we need to stop looking at those relationships transactionally and start recognizing that there's lots of benefits that can come from our colleagues as well. So I'm just going to wrap it up. None of us knows what's going on in somebody else's life, but we can all help them cope through those challenges through human connection. Everybody in this room is already a superhero. You're already bought in to this message of human connection. I hope that what I've shared with you today, you can layer on to the work that you're already doing. And I'd be happy to chat with anybody as a follow-up to this conversation who wants to implement some of the programs or campaigns into the work that you do, wherever you might do that work. And then finally, recognizing we all need to be in this together. Whether we're social infrastructure, whether we're social prescribing, or we're upstream in prevention, we need to provide people the solution that's right for the person at the time that they're in right now. So with that, these are our social platforms. I'd love to have you follow us on at least one of our platforms. Every day we post tips, tools, and ideas on how people can build healthier connection habits. We have our Gen Well weekend coming up May 1st to 3rd. All we try to do is encourage people to think consciously of who could you reach out to, whether it's one person or 10 people. Is it a barbecue, a walk, a coffee? Because every one of us can actually make a difference in the lives of others just by reaching out and having those conversations. We have Seniors Loneliness Awareness Week, June 15th to 21st. You know, think about who's the senior in your life that you could reach out to and make a difference. Because, my friends, at the end of the day, we need each other more than ever before. We are all in this together, and the best medicine for people is actually people. And with that, I'm just going to say thank you. I'll turn off my screen. I'll say goodbye because I know that we don't have time for questions. But thank you, everyone, for letting me be a part of this. Thanks, Ann Britt. Jacob.
Thank you, Pete. Thank you, Pete.
Thank you, Jacob.
Very good. Thank you for connecting to us all the way from Toronto. I'm Jacob. I've been deeply involved in this project for the last couple of years, and I'll be your host for the upcoming panel. I think we need the program, yes. And I'll actually ask the panel to come down and sit here. So Jack here and Maya, Marcus. But while they are being seated, maybe just also a big shout out to our virtual audience today. We have a lot of different people tuning in from MIT, from Bloomberg. We have the German Loneliness Association. We have a university in Ethiopia. So, and I think it's very symptomatic of our experience here with this project in looking into the paradox of proximity. That it's really generated a lot of interest, a lot of energy from not just from Denmark, but from all these countries we've been in. And I'm sorry to say, but this is not, as was alluded to before, not the really first launch, because we have been in Osaka, in Tokyo, in Vancouver, in Toronto, and Seoul, and had a lot of interesting discussions and learned so much. So, but it is a topic with a lot of energy, and also because we found it gives a new lens to how we actually look at cities, when we have to look at it from the perspective of a human feeling, and connecting that very basic human feeling to all the way up to how we plan our cities, master planning. And how do you make that connection? How do you make urban development personal? So I will actually sit down very personally with the panel, and I will ask you to introduce yourselves, and just very briefly who you are, from what organization, and that will come back to how you engage with this topic. But I'll ask you to reflect on a time that you have been feeling lonely in the city. So Jack Renteria, you're in the book.
Thank you very much, Jacob. My name is Jack Renteria. I'm the principal of a consultancy called Generation Global, and I work with investors and developers, also municipalities and operators, on the development of new residential concepts. And then you want me to answer the question?
Can you have you tried to feel lonely in the city?
Yeah, I was reflecting on that, and I was trying to think of what I was going to say about that. And it wasn't actually so much when I was younger. I had a moment probably a few months ago where my partner and I were at home, and our son was between football practice and all of these other things, and we were figuring out. We were trying to figure out, so what do? We have to be at home in case our son comes home, but we have nothing to do. We have no friends. What's our life about? And we really basically sat down there at that moment and said, okay, we need to get out more. We need to contact our friends and go for dinners and things like that.
Okay, so later, I think that sounds like you're not alone in that experience. Maya.
Yeah.
Please introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me here. My name is Maya Spiro. I'm an anthropologist and social impact lead at Henning Larsen Architects. I work with user engagement, strategies for inclusion, how we can think about different user groups in a meaningful way in our cities, but also various typologies. And an experience of having felt lonely. I was thinking about this quite a lot when you sent the question over, and I thought of moving to London in my early 20s. A friend of my dad's had a place that I could stay for free, and that was like reason enough to go. And I do really remember saying to a lot of people like, oh, I really want to taste anonymity. I want to be in a big city and I want to be on my own. And of course that was like maybe partly true, but I still wanted, someone to go get a coffee with or go out dancing. And for months, I really felt like that was just always on the tip of my tongue, this like invitation, and I couldn't get it out. Like I couldn't physically extend the invitation to a colleague or whoever. And then some time passed and I was like ready to leave and ready for the next adventure. And I started talking about that with people, and it was the thing that I connected with people right in the last few weeks of being in London. It was like so much opened up just by having the conversation with other people about having this really lonely experience in London. So it taught me a lot.
I think that was also Pete's message about actually having awareness. So thanks for sharing that. Marcus, will you just say who you are?
Yes, hello everyone. My name is Markus Kalmari. I come from Finland, from city of Turku, where I work as a sports director in our city sports department. We try to promote sport for all, grassroots sports, sports culture in general, but simply a better life and happiness through the physical activity to our citizens. And
have you experienced loneliness in Turku?
Yes, now I tell you what was my experience a few years ago when we found out in our city that we have over 3,500 kids, children and adolescents who want to participate to the sport activities, but because of various barriers, they cannot. And most reason why they want to, one of the biggest reasons why they want to be active in these activities, they want to have fun, they want to do that with friends, they want to make new friendships. So I need to start to do something on that point.
So you feel loneliness on behalf of these kids?
Exactly, yes.
Thank you. Joe, you already introduced yourself, but do you have any experiences with this topic? Personal experiences?
Yeah, I mean, I think maybe similar to some of the other panelists' life transitions. I think if I reflect upon it, becoming a new parent and suddenly also maybe your friends are not so interested in hanging out with you because you've got a baby, right? If you're the first mover. And that can create conditions where you suddenly lose one group of friends or contacts and you have to rebuild others. And then also as an outsider here, I mean, we're talking here in Copenhagen, as an outsider here in Denmark, I think, to other foreigners, I never advise them to move to Denmark in the winter. Denmark is a very sociable country, but there's a very tight-knit connectivity here, and people tend to socialize at home in the winter. And I remember I moved here in February, and I found those first few months very difficult. And then, of course, when spring came, suddenly the city was transformed because you're like, oh, people come out, people socialize outside, and you obviously have to build connections to anticipate for the coming winter when people go into hibernation. But I think felt loneliness at times in the winter in Denmark.
What about you, Anton?
I'm going to be your annoying colleague, so I'm going to go a bit rogue on you. No, I was pondering because you asked me yesterday when I felt lonely, and there is a moment in my life where I thought I was supposed to feel lonely, but I actually didn't, because I have, like Maya, I moved to London when I was 19, all alone, didn't know anybody, didn't have a job, was completely, rebla rasa. And I thought that I would have that sense of loneliness because I was just completely alone. And then I just said I felt extremely energized and I had a lot of opportunity and I was moving and I had these formative experiences when I was there. It came later, but in the beginning where I had this most amazing feeling of being connected to a place where I had no people, I knew nobody, but I felt extremely connected to the place, even though it came later. But I thought I was going to be more lonely when I arrived there.
That must be the sign of a successful city, when you can feel alone, when you, even though you don't know people. So that is also, I think, what when we talk about cities and this paradox of proximity and the complexity of it. There's so many interesting things to dive into, and one of the things is the home, because this is basically, where we usually have our social contacts, at least historically, or in the kind of process of human evolution. We usually have our social connections around the home. So this is also something we've been looking into also in the book, Jack, and we've interviewed you. And I think in Denmark, we spend about 67% of our time in our homes. So, and about 44% of homes in Copenhagen are single households. So, can we start to view our home as a place where we not just live, but actually where we have a broader social circle? And what can we do about that?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that this is a very interesting question. And it has kind of two implications when we're talking about home as part of like social infrastructure. One is that we have to think about what is the meaning of home. And when I look around this room, I mean, it's going to mean something different for all of you. The second aspect is the investment case or the delivery of these homes. And so if I touch on the first one just briefly here, we can take a look at many global mega trends right now. There's a shift in demographics. People are they're staying older longer. I forget how I put it before, but it was like people are not just wanting to stop working at 65. They just keep going and going and going, as we've seen in the president, anyways. And then you've also got people that want to stay younger longer too. So they're delaying major life decisions. They're not getting married in their 20s. They're waiting till their 30s, also to have children. And so this means that the traditional homes that we've had before are no longer really the right environments for us. In fact, now we're looking at maybe there are different types of homes for different stages of our lives. And then that leads to, well, what are these then? ULI, or the Urban Land Institute, has this Emerging Trends in Real Estate report. And in this report every year, they name like the top 10 sectors to watch. And this year, 5 of the top 10 sectors were some kind of living concept. It was co-living, senior, student, affordable living, and service departments. And so this really means that our homes are being totally diversified and we're living in different kinds of places. And with the second thing, which is how these homes are being delivered and the investment cases, I'll just maybe give an example. I was lucky enough to work on the concept, the co-living concept for cactus towers. That was really, really controversial in 2020. I had been talking about this concept I had seen in the UK called The Collective, and I went to the owner of the project called Catella, and I told them about the types of people that were living there, and that it was young professionals, and it was really, really good for loneliness. It was great for creating a sense of community. And they looked at me as if I was crazy, and they said, this is an unproven concept. It doesn't even have 10-year cap rates, not even in London. Why are you doing this? And why would you do this? And we ended up doing a report. We did a study, we did a lot of focus groups, we went to companies and we spoke to them about, would this be of interest? And I had several companies say, when will this project be finished? One company said, we'll take a whole floor, because they understood that this would help their employees. One of the companies had actually told me that they had several of their young employees that came from another country under suicide watch. And so when we delivered this report to Catella, they were absolutely convinced. And they said, yeah, we definitely have to do this. And so it was a really fortunate decision. And I mean, I think they took a very mature decision saying, let's go for it. And in the end, it actually paid off when they sold it for 1.2 billion Danish kroner. So it actually does show that there is a win-win here. Sorry, that was a long answer.
No, but I think, and I'd like to get back also on the business case, and because it's so crucial to actually scaling up some of these solutions that actually provide social value in housing. But first, Maya, I was made aware of you that you are an anthropologist working for an architecture company. I thought that was interesting because you're not actually an architect, so you know about people. And actually, so
it's
what
a big
can
statement.
this knowledge about humans, how can we use that to create places that foster social connection? And what are some of the paradoxes you encounter when you do that?
It's good questions, big question. It's two questions, actually. I might start from the second, if that's okay. I think we encounter a lot of assumptions made about scale, for example. So, creating spaces where people can gather, that often means like big spaces, open spaces, extroverted spaces, parks, plazas, in a maybe more commercial environment, that could be a mall or... but I think this has come up a lot. People experience spaces very, very differently. Access to those spaces is very different across people. You can be in a really busy environment and feel extremely lonely, right? We know that. So there's something there that needs to be tweaked. And then I think the human perspective, as you call it, for me, it's like this curiosity or like a motivation to investigate the diversity of the human experience. So to really delve into how different people approach different spaces and to use that yes, to find commonalities across groups, but also to embrace the differences. I think that provides clarity in terms of a design challenge. It helps us answer like really, really, really basic questions like who are we designing for? Who is already there? Who is maybe not present? All of those things can kind of help articulate a design challenge in a more meaningful way. And then, of course, from there, there's so many things that we could come up with, and they need to be tailored to the context, to the culture, to all of those things. But I think moving away from some of those biases and paradoxes to create more meaningful interventions. Is that?
Great. Let's also dig into that later.
Okay.
But first, Marcus, now we heard Pete talking about not just design, but actually policies and programming. And you represent, I would say, the policy side from the city of Turku. You also, the city is part of the book. Can you say something about how you use these sports vouchers as not just social glue, but actually as a means of also including everybody in the city?
Yes, this is when we faced this problem, what I was mentioning earlier, what felt me lonely. This is a quite big challenge. It's not simple to solve. It's not only about this sport voucher. It's a complex issue. First, what we did was the thing that we needed to collect the data. We needed to ask very many things from our citizens, kids and children and adolescents, why they are active, why they are not active, what would make them be active, and what are the barriers, and get a kind of very, very accurate picture of the situation on a postal code area level, different genders, different age group, which sport is popular, which is not, how is our sports facilities located compared where these kids are living, and so. And yes, we found that this is a complex thing. Not only the single sport policy can solve this, and there is many stakeholders. inside the city organizations, for example, schools, our architectures, logistical department, and all this other transportation department, and so public transportation. And yes, we've collected this data and we share it to the every stakeholders and started to sort of break down these barriers. And one of the biggest barriers were the too high costs for the hobbies, sports hobbies. So we used this data and started last year. At the beginning of last year, we launched this sports voucher. Every kid who is living in our city from age 7 up to 19 years old, they get few €100 sports voucher to be a part of some sports clubs. And first year, what the results we got, over 1,500 kids were involved more in sports clubs than earlier years. The growth was 11%, and we saw the growth, most growth in the most segregated areas, where were the lowest social or socio-economical status. And yes, this is related, these motivation things, what comes to the solving at the same time also this issue of loneliness. And yes, other barrier is also that not only the money, but like I said earlier, are these activities organized so that there is feeling of social belonging for these kids? Does it improve their self-competence, feeling of self-competence, and is there autonomy in these activities? There should be autonomy.
Yes, and I think I hear some agreement about at least understanding the data, understanding the facts of the citizens that you are actually trying to support, and that's also your focus, Joe, in Cities for Better Health. But I think it's interesting also that you started to look at not just mental health but social health, because previously it had been very much on the kind of the more hardcore physical concepts such as obesity and other types of indicators. How do you see the connection with these more kind of intangible topics like loneliness and feelings and mental health?
Yeah, I mean, I think the panelists and Pete also did a really, really good job at articulating the link, and it seems obvious when they say it. And actually, as ex-WHO staff, as the World Health Organization, I just went back to look at the definition of health that the WHO has set up, and it's the complete state of physical and mental and social well-being, and not merely the absence of disease. So I think already in the definition of health established by the World Health Organization, it is there, the connection between mental and social well-being and physical health. So in practice, if we're being good health practitioners, we should always be thinking about mental health from the outset. And I think also Pete really articulated the connectivity and the bi-directional relationship between physical dimensions of health, risk factors for health, and social connection and mental well-being. And I think what the implication of that is, like, how are we designing public health interventions, and that means that we have to absolutely take a holistic approach. And as we see from the data, that like if it's concentrated in underserved communities, both, let's say, some of the social connectivity challenges, mental health challenges, as well as some of the health topics that the government also wants to address, we really need to be thinking about connecting the dots in that approach. Not in terms of both in terms of how we design the interventions and design the programs, because, for example, if we're not thinking about social isolation, loneliness, mental health, when we're designing a program intended to improve other health behaviors, it won't be as effective. Around people will not access services. They won't participate in interventions like the sports voucher that are intended to address, physical activity as a risk factor, because it's the failure to think about social isolation or mental health will undermine that, and vice versa, right? So if we don't think in physical activity around how do we make this inclusive, how do we make it a safe space for people to participate, they won't take it up. I think we should also think about it in terms of how we evaluate the programs. I think health stakeholders sometimes only think about did people do more physical activity. I think we should be thinking more holistically about how we evaluate, what was the impact on people's mental health and well-being, their sense of inclusion in the community. It's also shooting ourselves in the foot, because some of these some indicators of health, like physical activity or even obesity, are really hard to shift at a population level. Perhaps there are some indicators that things are working as intended if we say, okay, actually, could we earlier on identify that people felt better, people felt it was good to participate in this, they went home feeling better. That's probably a sign that things are working more broadly. And then I would just say the implications also in the context we're here is that because we need this holistic approach, because it needs to be thinking more outside of health, we also need to work with other sectors. I mean, the health community can't do this alone. We have to be also working with others who are designing cities for livability.
Yeah, and that's also the connection that we try to explore in the book, and going to many different places around the world. We heard some cases here from Asia and Europe and North America, but ending with my colleague Anbrit. Couldn't you think that these cultures are so different? So when you hear about different expressions of loneliness, that it's you have to treat them in isolated silos, because it's just it's so dependent on culture. So you actually can't really use this global approach to anything. How do you see the connection between what's human and what's culturally dependent?
I think we need both. I think when we went around the world and interviewed people, there is if loneliness, loneliness is not random. It follows patterns. So there are ways to look into this on a global level. Because whether we've been in Tokyo, we've been in Seoul, we've been in Toronto or in Paris, we've seen the same human basic need, the need for connection, the need to be seen, the need to feel useful, and very, very importantly, the need to feel allowed to stay. That is very basic human values that we find all over the world. That is universal. What we need at a local level is where we implement things, because whether those values are validated, that's where those needs are either supported or they're blocked. That's where governance comes in. That's where cultural differences comes in. That's where urban systems comes in. So we have this, loneliness is very universal, but the causes and the solutions are deeply local. So universal level, global level is where we identify patterns we see today. I think everywhere around the world you can see social media today that are not social media, that are anti-social media, because 60% of the content you see on there is not made by your family or friends. It's not updates on people you know. It's made by people you don't know. It's marketing, whether it's disguised or not. So those trends are universal. We see those globally. But the solutions and where we're actually allowed to change it and where we can change it is at a deeply local level.
Yeah, and just before we continue, Mel, just to say to our virtual audience, also you can give some questions or comments, and my colleague Christopher will pick them up, and we might have time to answer them. But I want to pick up on that actually, and some of the things you. The rest of the panel said about the relationship between activities, programming policy, and then the design, because it has been our experience that some of these different departments, some of these different initiatives are not always connected. What is the potential of connecting activities, policies with urban design? Anyone? Yeah, sure.
I think we have to talk about process, actually. So design, the lifetime, the life timeline of a master plan or a new library or a new, I don't know, infrastructure project, climate resilience, doesn't matter what it is, it takes a long time. And we have to treat that time as an opportunity space to, first of all, learn about the community, learn about people, but also empower them, give them a voice, give them an opportunity to be the experts that they are about the space that they're in, the neighborhood that they love. And then, I mean, added value obviously is also meeting each other in that space. There can be so much frustration through, that limbo moment where your neighborhood becomes dusty and loud with all the, machinery and whatever. Like, people can bond over hating the project, that's a real opportunity space. And that's even before we even come to what we've designed, what we've implemented, what it looks like, and how we measure it, 2, 10, 15 years down the line. So that, I think, is a really, really, really important chapter.
Yeah, Joe?
I mean, I think taking on a slightly different tangent, I agree with what you were saying, but I think yesterday we hosted a discussion as Cities for Better Health on coalition building. And I'll get to the sort of like the design piece there, but I think what we, from some of our work around the world, and yesterday we profiled work in Johannesburg and Mississauga in Canada, where they are trying to address at multiple levels, like childhood obesity. That's the topic that they're working on. And one of the key themes that came out from that work is the importance of building a strong coalition around shared objectives from the outset, because the problem is a lot bigger than just one department can address. So getting the different actors, including people who have responsibility for urban planning in the coalition, as well as the people who have responsibility for schools. Like if you want to use schoolyards, for example, as a space to gather, you need permission from the schools department to open those out of hours, for example. But if you want to do tactical urbanism that involves something in the streets, you probably need the permission of the urban planning department. So having a coalition around the shared objectives and aligning to different people's strategies, right? Because I mean, we've probably in the course of this hour discussed so many different entry points and different priorities for making people have better health and mental well-being. Think what are the anchors there that the coalition can build around. And then I think one of the things that we've also learned through our work is co-creation with the community and making sure that the community voice is in there, because we probably think we know what the solution is, but unless you actually hear it from the community, it's unlikely to hit the nail on the head.
And the reason I'm asking also, I think at least here in physically, I think we have a lot of urban designers. But it seems like that's not always enough. There needs to be like a coordination or coherence. We talked to a pension fund recently who complained that they put down some benches and barbecue and nobody used it. And I think you have some experience with that, Jack, as well, and how you kind of support urban design or the physical framework with actual activities or policies.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think holistically, when we're taking a look at doing new homes, whether it's at the co-working or co-living or the senior or the student level, multifamily, we're looking at programming, right? We're looking at what is the environment in which you're living. And that means the common areas, but then we're now starting to add operational layers like services or activities. In some of my projects, we have a community manager. And this was always a little bit nerve-wracking for pension funds, because they would be like, well, we don't do operations, we just do the building. But then there is always a facility manager and there's always building administration. So we just added another part, which could be done by the other two, actually. We found ways to be optimized. And so what this does is it starts, activating the common areas. It starts activating the community. It starts getting them all engaged. When we did one senior project, there were 62 units, and we actually onboarded all of them to some of the technology so that they could start communicating with each other. They were so good at it, but we needed to have our community manager spend probably 30 minutes with each of them to do that. And then that got them really engaged in the rest of the spaces. So they created their own groups that would go down and use the cinema. They would, so I think that activation part is very, very key. And that's where, someone like a community manager can really help.
Yeah, and we had a discussion also recently about culture, about also we had a question, what can the single individual do to promote social connection? So, and I think there's also a risk that the people we support and involve and make room for are actually not the people who need it the most. How can we actually make sure that the vulnerable people that Pete also talked about are the ones we actually reach in our programming or in our urban design? Do you have any thoughts about that?
I can try and I think what today actually has done really well is demonstrate that we're talking about a very human experience, and maybe there's degrees of loneliness, or is it something that I experience momentarily, or is it something that I'm struggling with for a prolonged period of time? That's maybe a significant difference there, but it's still this like very fundamentally human experience. And I think if you have all the data, you have all the stats about why this is something that we should be putting more focus on. So if we do take the opportunities, in the work that I do, for example, engaging with user groups, how do I bring that into the line of questioning? How do I take that into an interview with an elderly person, a teenage girl, whoever that might be? And I think you're right in how you reframed the questions to kind of avoid the stigma or whatever, but to really tap into this as a meaningful field of inquiry when we're doing when I'm doing engagement processes, at least that feels like a big step. And then, of course, an intersectional perspective will help to take that even further. So I don't know, maybe investigating whether or not people who are living with various disabilities, are they experiencing loneliness due to not being able to physically access some spaces? That could be a meaningful intersectional lens. Or, elderly people, widowers. Now, I don't know if any of you have been diving into this whole manosphere bullshit that is out there, but that also feels like a really meaningful intersection to start to explore. Young men, teenage boys who are basically positioned against women and against each other, and I can't imagine something more isolating than that. So this intersectional perspective, I think, can really help us investigate it in a meaningful way.
All right, thanks a lot. I actually am a little bit over time, but maybe if there is one question from the audience. Yes, over here.
Hi, my name's Fiona, and my background is the events sector. So I've worked with major events like Olympics, which just have volunteer communities who have really experienced pride in their place. And I'm a member at BLOX, and I love this environment. But I sometimes wonder if we're maybe trying to solve human challenges with things that aren't human, like a building or a nice road or something. So what have you found in the work that you're doing in relation to how events could be used to solve this human challenge we face?
Anybody want to go for that? Joe?
I can go partially. I can at least have an attempt to answer it partially. It's a bit related to something else, but I think when we taking an example one step removed, and maybe then we can come back and think how it applies to the sort of social isolation and connectivity piece. But I think when we're thinking about getting people cycling, we often think about the built infrastructure, right? Making sure that they have cycle paths, etc. And then we think about the human infrastructure around it, which is around giving people the capabilities, skills, confidence, and community to feel that they can engage in it. So especially if you're trying to reach specific communities that may not be participating in cycling, you can't assume that just give them a cycle path, give them a bike and they'll go, because there may be cultural reasons why they're not cycling, confidence reasons. So I think designing things both with a a physical and a built lens and a human lens is of course essential, and I think that's where your question was getting at it, as how do we bring the human perspective into what is a human challenge. Of course I wouldn't say no to designing cities that invite for connection, but then I think there's the whole layer of activation of it as well. You have to go one step further in order to activate those spaces that have invited for human connection. That was my attempt, but I'm sure others have stronger views.
Yeah, when you said you're in Vine there about how events can contribute to human connection, it brought me way back to 1999, or no, sorry, not that far, to 2019.
That's a Prince song.
And it was the first time that I went to a co-living building that I wanted to try out and see if it really did walk the talk. And I saw that there was a running group meeting at 6 p.m. that evening, and it was December in London. It was cold, and I thought, okay, I'm going to go and do it. And I went downstairs, and there were like 6 or 7 others there. And there was a young lady that came over to me, and she said, "Hi, my name is Claire. Welcome to the running club." And off we went and ran. And then we came back and then went up for a drink. And one of the comments that I heard or overheard was somebody saying, "Wow, instant friends." And I thought that was kind of like an aha moment for me.
Great. I think that was a great. You have a comment?
No, yeah.
No, okay.
No, I just one last thing. I think a very nice example of how to connect sort of an events with this mindset of changing or designing for loneliness is we've experienced it where we go to Japan. We have the term of ibasho, which can mean a mindset, being at ease, being completely yourself, not being in performance mode, just being present and feeling good about yourself. But it can also be a physical place where the place is defined by those values. So it means we went to one in Tokyo in the back skirts, and you come in and it's very low key, and people they don't know necessarily each other. We know nobody. But you sit, you come, you have a meal together, you pitch in when you feel like pitching in, and then you withdraw when you feel like it. So all of a sudden we would have dinner and somebody would, withdraw, and they would be on a trampoline with a computer and doing their own stuff, and then they will come back again to join the community, and all of a sudden there would be a lady who would retreat and read a book for half an hour, and then she'll, chip into the community again. So that kind of designing for just being present is, I think, a very, very nice way of doing community if you want to meet people who have loneliness.
And that's also really, I think, been so interesting about this project, that if you try to understand a city from a human perspective, from an emotional perspective, it opens up also a lot of things you need to discover. Like, for example, it's not always when you're around people that you don't experience loneliness. That this sense of belonging, you can actually feel threatened by being in a big crowd. And if you've been in Tokyo's main central station, that's quite frightening, actually. So there's a lot of knowledge to be discovered. There's a lot of aspects to dive into, both in terms of design, but also in terms of how can programming, whether it's in buildings, whether it's in districts or cities, policies, how can they actually reinforce each other to foster more healthy social connections? So that is, this is, I think, from our part, also from Cities for Better Health part, we are working together on this, also together with the Roundball Foundation, on actually trying to create a global platform for preventing loneliness and improving social health. So, if you can, so just as a finish off, please, if I can ask you to give an applause to the panel here today for their insights. It was far too short, but as I said, we will continue the discussion. And also thank you to everybody who's been watching online. And please, if you want to connect to this initiative, to the work we're doing in the coming months and hopefully years, please connect to us. and we can create this platform together in preventing loneliness, not just in this city, but hopefully also in cities from Asia all the way to North America. So I'll just say goodbye to the virtual audience. For you who are here today, we have a few drinks to connect socially, because that's what it's all about, and hope to be working with you in the future. So thank you very much, and thanks for coming.